Hi everyone. I think we are still waiting for a few people to join us. So to those already here, welcome to the webinar Global Business Services Setup and Scale. I think probably what we'll do is hold off for a few minutes, but my name's Lucy Bilby. I'm the Global Director at Elliott Scott HR. We're really delighted to have you here on our first global webinar, of which we have plenty more hopefully to come. The session will be recorded and we will be able to send around the link afterwards. We are really hoping for this session to be interactive, so would like to ask you to submit any questions as we go along, and those will then be put to the panel. If we have any time, obviously we can follow up on those, but hopefully we can get those answered throughout the session, and questions perhaps will get answered as the panelists are talking anyway. I'm quite conscious we have got a global audience, and I know some of whom are at the end of their day. Some are actually just starting their working day as well. We are still having people joining, but without further delay, I'll probably hand over to Stuart Elliott, CEO and host of the session, and Stu will introduce the team from here.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Lucy. That's great. And welcome everyone to the webinar. I've been so used to doing podcasts recently. It's interesting to do a live session, which I think adds a touch of nerves to the session as well, which is always nice. It keeps me on my toes. When we were discussing webinar ideas, actually, I'll be really honest, in 2023, the phrase "do more with less" kept appearing when I was talking to a lot of clients. Alongside that, maximizing lower cost locations in order to improve broader profitability seems to be another phrase that I used to hear quite a lot. And I think that's meant really that the spotlight has been firmly shone into the sort of the global business services area, shared services functions, etc. Now, we're all conscious that these aren't new. It's something that I suppose started, I think, late 80s, early 90s is where it sort of all began. And they've really evolved and developed over time. And that's some of the bigger businesses. Some of the smaller businesses have been latest to the show, and I think they've been starting more recently. But we thought this would be a really good topic to sort of talk about more broadly, some of the interesting parts that have happened over the years, some of the challenges going forward, some of the talent that we see within that space as well. And to do that, we're really lucky to have some wonderful guests with us. So before we sort of go any further, it'd be nice to sort of for everyone to sort of introduce themselves. And I'll start with you, Carl, as I go around the room on my screen. Carl, can you give us a little introduction into yourself and your background?
All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Kyle Davis. I've been working in the corporate environment for over 35 years. I spent 21 years at American Express. At American Express, 10 of those years I spent as a process owner who moved processes to our global service center in India, and so migrated those processes and then managed the governance of those processes over the years. After American Express, I went to Expedia, and my role in Expedia, I was a managing director of the business-to-business brand agencia for Expedia in Asia Pacific. So I was responsible for the processes themselves. I was also responsible for the service center that we centralized the processes to in India. Most recently, I spent 4 years at Vistra, which is a large accounting company formation organization, where I was managing director of the global service centers, leading over 2,000 professionals in India, China, Malaysia, and Mauritius. So that's a little bit about my background in this domain.
That's awesome. Thanks so much for that, Carl. Now, going around the room, Amitabh, would you like to do a little intro into yourself and your background?
Sure. Thanks, Stuart. And again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all. I come from a multi-faceted background, about 25 years of experience, out of which I want to divide that into two halves. Essentially, the first half, it was with Infosys, and Infosys, the tech company, as you guys know. Quite a bit of my initial days were with software and software development and IT consulting and so on. and moving on to managing large portfolios, doing business development in the US and the UK for a varied number of clients across, industries and domains. And then moving on to HSBC for the last 11 years or so, where I've been involved in heading the global transformation practices across the GSCs. Now, the GSCs are typically, as you would come to see in our conversation later, are places like India, places like China, places like Mexico, Malaysia, Poland, Egypt, Sri Lanka, and so on and so forth. So my teams are global. Essentially, we handle large transformational engagements across the bank, across the four businesses in the bank. So I currently have just moved on from HSBC. So my views in this conversation will be based on my experience gathered over the last 25 years with HSBC and Infosys. Thanks for having me, and looking forward to the discussion.
Perfect. That's great. And Gaurav Bhalla, would you like to do your introduction? And for our audience, Gaurav is feeling a little bit under the weather, so bear with his voice as well.
Yeah, no, thanks, Stuart. So hi all. So first of all, thanks Stuart, inviting me for, sharing my perspective on what are we going to discuss today. So with respect to my experience, I have more than 20 years of experience, primarily kind of, managing the HR shared service model from the scratch, setting up and then scaling up the solution to really focus on the employee experiences. I have managed number of global and the regional transformation and grown from very, initial level in my career where I used to manage the payroll and then, move to regional, regional space and then after global. So my last assignment with, Nomura, where I was kind of leading in the global shared service model, managing a different strategical pillars. For an example, the hard to retire, global mobility, you have data analytics, performance management, whatever you think as in, which has the opportunity to really optimize. I was kind of managing those stuff, and we have been kind of catering the global requirement, more than 28,000 people all over the world. And I would say, very keen to travel. So I've been around a number of places in this role, which is something exciting for me as in working for the global organization, which gives you the opportunity to travel and the explore culture, doing networking. So I have been kind of enjoying my, this forte, I would say, for the last 20 years, and very keen to drive, the digital experience in this space and how technology disruption can play a wider role, to really drive customer experience. I'm very passionate about, what I do in this industry, and you will look forward, while you hear from us, on the, the Global Business Service Center, how it's kind of evolving in the future and currently. Yeah. Thanks, Stuart.
No, thanks so much, Gaurav. And then last but not least, Gaurav Yadav, do you want to do your little intro?
Hello, everyone. My name is Gaurav Yadav, and I lead India business. And I come with about 15 plus years of work experience in executive search industry. Out of those, 11 years in Singapore. Came to India 3 years ago, and I've been leading India business since then. Personally, I focus on financial services as well as GCC desk here in India. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much. And obviously it's good to have Gaurav on here as well, because a lot of the roles that we do get in India actually are in this space. So that's where it's been fascinating for us over the last couple of years. So before we get started, just want to sort of run through a few little sort of stats really for everybody. So India has essentially been identified as the top location for global shared services. There are a number of others, as Amitabh referenced just now as well. So followed by sort of Poland, there's Mexico, and these are all referencing a survey recently by Deloitte. You'll also find Malaysia is a top 5 entry, followed by China. And then you also have places like Bulgaria, Ireland, Mexico. Now, I've also heard of other places. Lithuania was another one of late that I know a company was setting up in. And I know companies are always looking to be a little bit, I suppose, inventive with this and where they go next. So it's a fascinating space. The survey by Deloitte also revealed that India is on track to have over 1,900 global capability centers, employing roughly 2 million people and generating around $6 billion in revenue. So it's big money nowadays. It's a lot of people also involved in it, and therefore it has even greater importance, I think, now to most companies. Before we begin with the questions, there is a Q&A button there. If you have questions, it's nice to have them as we go through, so we can maybe slot them in. We will run for about 10 minutes over, just to sort of have questions at the very end. However, if you do get questions, ask them as we go, because as I said, we might be able to slot them in. And I also know that people are conscious of time. But for today, I want to start, Carl, I'd like to come to yourself. You touched on it in terms of your background and experience, but historical context, what was it like when you first started in this space?
Yeah, so I joined American Express in 1991, and in 1994, American Express set up its first service center in Gurgaon, India. It was internal accounting, and I think that was followed by HR, mostly internal processes. Little by little, we started adding customer-facing processes, externally facing processes. And then in 2001, so that's what, 6 or 7 years later, I was heading up the corporate travel business for American Express in Asia Pacific, and we set up our first global service center for travel for American Express in Gurgaon. That was around 2001, 2002. And at that time, I started traveling to India. I actually started traveling there about 1999, 2000, preparing for the setup. We were in Gurgaon, and it was literally a dirt road from the New Delhi airport into Gurgaon, and just open fields everywhere. And if any of you've been there, recently, you know that it's a megalopolis now with many areas. It looks like Manhattan. But yeah, when we started out, it was a few buildings, dirt roads, and generating our own electricity when we needed to.
Yeah, stuff like that's amazing. I always find it incredible when you look at where countries have been and where they were when they started, and now where they are right this second, and it shows you sort of how far that's come. If I move the conversation then to Gaurav and Amitabh, actually, you both, when we look at your background, you both forged careers, really good careers in this space. Did you ever think that this area would be as big as it is?
Yeah, I would like to begin, Amitabh. Yeah. Okay.
Go on, Gaurav. Go on.
Sure. So no, it's a very good question. I never realized that this space would kind of have a lot of opportunity and would grow like this. But yeah, like I mentioned, I started at a very initial level when this GBS concept was pretty new to the organization, and I have grown within the organization, looking at the magnitude of change, how industry change, and kind of the global exposure it creates. I would say I was there at the right time, at the right place, and when this things started moving ahead, and we started having the global kind of the flavor in between. So it's good to have from looking at from the perspective that how the career growth opportunities have been created in this space, and how people have started moving from their local role to regional, and then after at a global level. And I was very fortunate to really, have experience to lead a lot of transformation project in this industry. I would say, my entire experience, if I really summarize it, more than 15 years with the pharma organization, and the pharma organization to be considered very orthodox and pretty late to adopt the market practices. And this is something which we were trying to do back in 2000, I would say 2009. And we started looking into, how we really need to have the cost effectiveness, what makes sense for the organization perspective, and strategically from where we can run the business, which really give us more efficiency, standardization, and with the technology disruption, how we can really focus on the employee experience. And then gradually, we started looking into what are the market the trends and how we really need to adopt. Then we have a cloud-based system coming into, then ServiceNow coming into the picture, and now kind of focusing on AI and RPA. It's a kind of, I would say, amazing experience in last 20 years. If I look back, if I reflect, where we had started and where we have reached now, it's a kind of amazing experience, and especially working for the organization, which really gives you a lot of opportunity to drive and lead transformation, which really important for your development perspective also.
Yeah, completely. Amitabh, do you want to evolve on that?
Yes,
Well,
I will add a couple of points. So my story is somewhat similar in principles that, when I was starting off with Infosys way back in 1998, I think it was not even a $1 billion company. And again, a lot was being talked about Y2K and, things of the immediate near-term future and all of that, if you remember. And we used to have a term that we would use very frequently at that time, was something called GDM, or Global Delivery Model. And that would essentially mean doing the work where it makes more sense to be done from. So essentially, if the work is originating in the US or the UK or Hong Kong, does it make sense to get the work done out of there, or does it make sense to get the work done out of one of the GSC centers or GBS or GCC centers? And that's where the journey sort of started, and that's where the views started evolving in terms of building such capabilities, building such infrastructure, having that human capital advantage, if you will, in terms of the diverse pool of talent, presence of other MNCs, multinational corporations, organizations with deep domain expertise, leadership talent, etc. And I think that was probably this, if not the start, or at least the initial years of how some of the concept of work being delivered from GBS locations, sort of, grew or evolved. And from there on, I think, moving on to HSBC, and I have been involved in setting up transformation centers in Mexico in November of 21. Prior to that, in Malaysia, I set up the Greenfield Center for Transformation in Kuala Lumpur. And all of these places, apart from our centers in Poland and India, I think some of the common threads that sort of tie all of those centers are elements of those, things like human capital advantage, innovation, and the ecosystem advantage, which means, a strong GCC ecosystem, innovation through, fueled through centers of excellence, capability extension through partnerships with startups, for instance. Those kind of things started sort of evolving. And I would say that, 20, 25 years hence, as you said, Stuart, I think the numbers are staggering, and people continue to realize the benefits of getting work done or delivered from the GCC centers. And so we are. So I think we are here and probably talking about this. The fact that we are talking about this in such earnest is testament to the fact that it is of consequence.
Yeah, I think it is actually, and it's interesting. Again, some of the things that you mentioned there. Carla, I want to come back to yourself. What is the main business reason for companies, I suppose, setting up these functions, and how have things, I suppose, improved over the years that you've been involved in it?
Yeah. Well, I think most people think the primary reason is wage arbitrage. And that is all actually pretty low on the list for us. What the major benefit that we get from globalization into a center, let's say in India, is global standardization of processes. And when you standardize your processes, then that's when you start getting efficiencies. You also have a huge opportunity to improve quality, to have visibility to what's going on. If you have processes that are dispersed over 20, 30 different countries, you don't always have visibility to what's going on. You don't have consistency in the metrics. You don't have consistency in the process. So I would say process standardization and implementation of a global quality framework into your operations is probably the primary benefits that you get. Also, we don't want to forget about customer experience, particularly if you have a global business. So you don't want to have a customer that they do business with you in the UK, Germany, Canada, And every time they interact with you in these different countries, it's a different experience, right? And so by having a center of excellence, you can deliver one consistent customer experience to your multinational customers.
Yeah, and I suppose I also used to hear, I suppose, a lot of criticism of these functions when they first started, but you hear much less now. Is that just a time thing, Carl, that you're on that side of things?
Yeah, I think, you know, there's it's a life cycle maturity of the industry. Initially, very simple processes were migrated with instructions. You had desktop instructions and you had to follow the instruction. But now we go into a market, India, Malaysia. These are all markets that have, you know, the British American educational systems, the qualifications for accounting, qualifications for company secretary, legal qualifications. These are all, you know, standard global qualifications, where you're getting really highly skilled professionals who are motivated, ambitious, and have very, very good communication skills. I think that's one of the major changes that I've seen over the past 20 years is the availability of not only people who are really good accountants or really good lawyers, but they also have very good English language communication skills.
Yeah, you've definitely seen that over the years. I think that's definitely that to your point, that English capability has definitely got better over the years. Amitabh, I'd like to come to you next, actually, on the next question. And I want to talk a little bit more sort of culturally. Western organizations, when they come into India, what do they get wrong when they first start there? Because appreciate that you've got cultures aligning a little bit when sort of Western cultures come into India as well.
Yes, so absolutely, and a brilliant question in that. So I think one of the primary reasons that I see that the culture gets sort of diluted at times, and that becomes an impediment in terms of setting up the center itself, is, you know, in my experience, I've seen that it gets lost between, let's say, the senior management and folks working, on the ground. And I think leadership has therefore a very, very important role to play in these situations to make that connection. So therefore, the more clearly an employee understands their direct impact, the more likely I have seen they will go the extra mile. And they will experience more fulfillment in doing so as well. So I think, to me, one of the top elements is to sort of have that leadership sponsorship or commitment, as whatever you want to call it. Along with that, and I think that sort of precedes quite a few of other elements that I want to talk about. One is creating a distinct people advantage, right? So when I say people advantage, I mean your talent retention practices, your talent hiring practices, your talent development practices, and so on and so forth. Taking care of your employees, right? I think that has become something extremely pertinent in today's world, because people are the center or the focal point of everything that we do. And therefore focus on employee well-being, on physical, mental, financial well-being, and all of that. Your reward and recognition practices for the right behaviors, your career development practices, your performance management practices, all of that, encouraging positivity, fostering social connections, and so on. So it all of these are pretty much driven down, in my opinion, through the leadership. And the better the organization is able to do that, the sooner an organization is able to do that, I think that's where we realize the benefit of the people right from, across the layers and so on and so forth. So that is how, we end about, building those cultures, because culture is the only thing probably that binds all people together in a multifaceted, very, very diversified, dispersed sort of world.
Yeah, I think that all makes perfect sense. Actually, I'd like to, for the next question, actually, I'd like to bring in Gaurav Yadav, actually, for us. I want to talk a little bit about talent, and we'll sort of go around the room a little bit on this one. Gaurav, talent, what does it look like in this space? Because I suppose with so many people, it can be quite mixed, and you've got very different levels of individuals as well, correct?
Yes, first of all, the competition is very stiff. There's a very high demand for talent, and especially places like Gurgaon, in Bangalore, and Pune, I do feel there's a shortage of the right talent. And then secondly, there are ample number of opportunities. Now, if we look at the global shared services market here in India, majority of them are based in Bangalore, and they are moving on to like tier two and other smaller cities, the B towns basically, and trying to get the best out of those cities actually. So there is definitely some kind of a talent crunch. And yeah, I mean, employers, they are now exploring different possibilities, in terms of, I've seen few cases where employers even went on a higher side when it comes to offering the compensations. And so basically people are looking at innovative ways to attract talent.
And compensation is another one, Gaurav, that we've seen go up quite heavily for really good people at the senior end, correct?
Absolutely. But again, one challenge that we face every day is, the compensation ranges are very, very vast. So I have seen, for a few roles, I've seen the compensation ranges among the market from, for example, like, I wouldn't name the grade, but I've seen ranges which might fall between 7 million Indian to 14 million. That is not a range. It's a very, very wide range, basically. So it is quite common in Indian market.
Yeah, and the other thing I think we've definitely seen, and it's worth sort of highlighting, is that when people are looking to sort of start up, a lot of companies started up quite a long time ago now. So actually, not many people have the startup experience. They've got experience of working within an organization in a corporate, but they haven't necessarily started something up. And we've definitely seen that being a little bit of issue for some of the roles that we've worked on.
And can I just add another point on to what you said and what Gaurav very eloquently sort of talked through? I think that one of the other elements of the talent piece is tied to the fact that today what we see is that the fundamental drivers of current performance as well as sustainable competitive advantage are changing. And they are changing because the growth opportunities and the capabilities required to win in the new markets are changing. And therefore, that adds to your dilemma. Today, you're talking of AI. 25 years back, you were not. You were talking of when you were hiring some other set of people. So therefore, that constant changing of the changing need for capabilities, making it even more harder for people to sort of be continuously on the bandwagon to sort of get upskilled and unlearning, relearning, and so on and so forth. And that sort of exacerbates the problem, right? I mean, aside to the element of the costing and the salaries and all of that Gaurav talked about. So
yeah, and I suppose, and the other thing as well, is we've mentioned it very briefly, I suppose, AI and technology. Gaurav Bhalla, you mentioned this is an area that you like. How is AI potentially going to disrupt that function there as well? Because I'm assuming that could potentially do a lot of the job that a lot of people do in India in these centers already.
Correct. No, so AI is a very important factor which is taking place. So AI plays a kind of a very important role when we look at from the customer-centric approach. It really provides a kind of the self-reliant culture within the organization. What we actually doing earlier, now from AI perspective, we can go ahead and drive those automation. Employee used to ask question, and then from AI perspective, now you just need to create your knowledge base and it's create a self-reliant culture where employee take support from AI and ask question. And it really help us to really automate and I would say optimize the resources within the organization, because now you really want to move from tier 0 to tier 1. It's a kind of terminology which we use in shared service. So tier 0 is a self-reliant culture. So we kind of more focusing on how we really create those digital experience for the employee, and we move something which create a lot of meaning as in what we really want to go out and do it. It also help us to scalable the solution, because we look at resources requirement is always a kind of important aspect whenever you scale up the solution. And with this AI opportunity, I believe it really help us to take more services with a similar kind of, the headcount and really optimize our resources in this space. Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose I'm then going to sort of go back to Kyle actually, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the setup process. If I was looking to set up a function in India now, how long does it take from start to finish? Like what's the sort of the time frame or time scale you normally advise people on? I suppose that could be a $1 million question, I guess, as well.
Yeah, it could. Before I answer that, I'm just go back to this question of AI, or at least machine learning. One thing that it's done just recently for us, I would say within the last 3 or 4 years, is that it has opened up non-English markets to a great degree. So, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, we could not have thought about doing German accounting in German language in India. And now with machine learning and OCR, we're able to instantaneously read an invoice in German and have automated accounting entries into the general ledger. So we've had some huge advances there, and so I think it's important that we talk about this isn't English language markets only anymore. And then particularly when we work with China and we're working with 2 languages, it becomes very, very, very important. In terms of setup, well, if you're small and you're thinking, well, I'm not going to have the scale to do it myself, I'm going to outsource it to a BPO, business process outsourcer. You can probably do that in several months, particularly if they are already doing a particular process that you want to do, that you want to migrate. It can be done very, very quickly. If you're going to set something up from scratch, depends what market you're going into, but you've got to look at, real estate, business licenses. Are you going to be doing regulated processes? My last business, Vistra, everything we did was highly, highly regulated. So we'd have to go through quite a rigorous process with the regulator. So setting up private equity accounting in Malaysia for the Netherlands, for example, we'd have to go through a number of processes to demonstrate our quality, our ability to perform. I would say if you're doing it from scratch and really going to want to set up a center, I would give myself at least a year, including planning and real estate and licenses and hiring leadership. I think, in India, sometimes you want to get a really senior leader for a center. You get the right candidate, they may have a 6-month notification period, right? And so if that's the person you want and you don't want to settle for that person with a 3-month notification, then you've got 6 months to get that more senior leader. So I do think setting it from scratch, you do need some lead time.
Yeah. So just to kind of add here, what Kyle has mentioned, I believe outsourcing or in-house, it's really dependent upon kind of the strategy which you have in the organization. What you want to achieve, whether your objective is a cost optimization, what is the kind of ROI, the framework which you have, what are the kind of phase-wise approach which you have. Generally, I've seen, organization first initiate a kind of in-house, shared services. They transform, they transition all the processes. They go ahead and streamline those and standardize those, with the help of technology disruption and other things. Once they reach at a level where they see that there is no further scope to really optimize the cost, then they go ahead and invite, the vendor outside. Let's see that what is a further, scope of really saving money. Whatever they wanted to do, they have gone. They kind of have achieved now. So let's go outside in the market looking at what is there. But my feeling, I would say, my opinion is that if we're really looking for the outsourcing, we get into kind of very much in the transactional mode. I believe with the outsourcing, we feel the kind of the human touch, which is something which can be remain alive when you have processes in-house, because you care for your employee. And when you outsource, they really focus on the SLA and the KPI, and they're going to talk about only focusing on SLA and AI. So with respect to customer experience, I believe that's dependent upon the organization, what they really want to go out and achieve, and what is their objective out of that. Yeah.
I think you're right there. I really like what you said there around what is it you want to achieve, and I think that's absolutely crucial. And we reference that a little bit. We used to outsource some of the work that we do to BPOs in say India or the Philippines, but we actually chose to sort of then in-house a lot of that, because then we have greater control of what we could do. But the bit that I was, I suppose, surprised about even just setting up in India was then the red tape that goes with it. And my advice to anybody on that would be, make sure you understand the processes that you go through. I think there was one instance, Gaurav, where even setting up an entity, I had to get my father's birth certificate at one point, which I was really surprised about. In terms of getting that set up. So there's a lot of things that I think people just need to be really aware of, and I know I wasn't, probably naively so on that side.
No, it's a kind of, the great experience which we have shared. But looking at, how India and the other location has become a kind of, market for GBS, there are kind of rise of the organization, which really help you to kind of, set up the entire structure for you, and you need not to bother about that. Obviously, you have to look at from the compliance perspective, what are the regularity, what are the kind of political stability out there. But I believe, I would say, there are a lot of changes in this space. So the companies have started kind of coming up, providing you the help in setting up your, shared service model. Yeah.
So I would also say, if you went to, if you're looking at building in China, I know my experience at Expedia, for a travel service center, we had to get 11 licenses. It took us 2 years.
Wow.
And many of them have to be sequential. You can't do them concurrently. You can't get this license until you have that license. So it was 11 licenses.
Yeah, and I just want to add to the point that I think a longer term view is always helpful in terms of setting that up. So to Gaurav's point, are we looking at what the immediate benefits are, or are we looking at what I'm going to gain from it for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? And that's when elements of, how is the political environment, how, and are the policies conducive? Are they helping? Are the budgets being allocated to a more consumer and budget, consumer friendly sort of way? Those elements come into account. I remember a story in a experience when I was opening Mexico. I know that Mexico is being talked about as a very heavy tech ops skilled workforce sort of place. Be that as it may, when I was looking at transformation skill set, which was a lot more into consulting and business transformation, I know that there are a few part of the big fours over there, but it was extremely difficult to get such talent at the price point that I would be looking at. So I think it's a combination of various factors to be able to make it attractive or not. And I think some of those elements are more intangible than tangible at the outset when things are being set up. So some things to probably keep in mind. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very much so on that side of things. One question I suppose I do want to ask to Amitabh and Gaurav. As companies expand, especially Western companies, a lot more are focused on CSR. They're focused a little bit more about, I suppose, the environment, etc. And I know that India probably has maybe a mixed track record on that side of things. Are these things becoming more important locally on the ground? Is that something that is changing over time?
Well, yes, I think significantly. I would say significantly, because sustainability and being a good corporate citizen sort of is hand in hand. And in fact, I have seen large organizations form strategies, and part of this strategy is clearly calling out their commitment to the environment and to the sustainability element of it. So absolutely. And I think this opens up another area for tech to come in, if not anything else, because, and it has already. In fact, AI is everywhere, and sustainability is a big part in which people talk about climate transition plans, helping our clients transition to zero carbon economies or footprints, essentially, and how, and banks and then organizations funding such initiatives, green initiatives, and so on and so forth, low emission technology, etc., and so on and so forth. So I think that is a prime on the agenda of some of the large in most corporations, I would say. Gaurav, anything that you would want to add to that?
Yeah, no, so you rightly mentioned, this is the another area where companies are kind of, spending more time to look at. I would say the credit goes to the government, how they kind of, pitching it. And there are certain rules and regulations which they have made it mandatory for the organization. How organization really want to have, sustainable practices, looking at, how they can create the awareness within the organization, P2P kind of approach, paper to portal, how can digital disruption can help you, how you can refrain yourself taking print out because that has the impact on the environment. Those are the kind of, I would say, a lot of programs which organization has started kind of rolling out just to create the awareness around that. And with respect to the social, I have seen many roles which are coming up in the organization, which is kind of, just to ensure that we are pretty much covered from the diversity and inclusion perspective. The employee wellness program is because earlier the mindset was different. We used to work for kind of, the salary and other things, but now people are looking something more along with the salary. They really want to create a balance in their approach, So what are the kind of practices which you have in the organization? What are the community engagement, how you can really kind of, involve your employee going to the outside world and helping the community which require more support from the from different perspective. So these are the things I believe company has started doing it, and I see that this is a kind of the trend now, and which is kind of picking up a lot these days. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, it's good to hear. It's something I probably don't hear enough of when I talk to people, I suppose, in India, and I'm glad that it's something that clearly is coming to the fore a little bit more. I want to move us back to talent a little bit, and there's probably been over the years, I'm sure we've all got stories and maybe a stereotype of India of hiring at a lower level and hiring being difficult, shall we say. Maybe people not turning up, people not accepting offers and using it as leverage. I think it's always been one that we've heard about. To all of you, actually, is there any hints, tips, or advice that you would give to people when they're hiring low-level staff in India around what they could do to mitigate risk as much as possible?
Well, one thing I'll jump in. One thing is to over offer. We know in India that we have anywhere from 10 to 15, and I'd say at the worst 20% offer accepted, failed to join. And so if we need 10 people, we will hire 11 because then we'll have 10 people turn up on the first day. And in fact, we know probably, there's probably going to be another 10%, maybe one person that doesn't fit. Either we decide that person isn't a good fit, or they decide that we're not a good fit for them. So generally, if you need 10 people, we would hire 12 or 13 and expect to be at 10 in 3 or 4 months. So that's one piece of advice I would give for that entry level individual contributor.
Yeah, I like that in terms of overhire. That's a good tip. Sorry.
Yeah.
Go on.
Go ahead. Okay. So, just wanted to add what Carl has mentioned. when we say employee experience, I believe it starts from the beginning when you're recruiting somebody, so it's very important how you really engage that employee, because from the India context, if you look at, your notice period is somewhere between 1 to 3 months. And that's such a gap, where employee feel lost or the candidate feel lost, how you really want to engage, what are your practices, how you're interacting with, checking on a weekly, how you involve manager in that part, so that's start from, I would say, when you start, recruiting, and once employee join the organization, that's a different thing. The another aspect I would say, which works very well is that what is a kind of, the extra, extra things which you have to offer along with the salary, really to attract talent. And employees are kind of more focusing these days. What is a kind of hybrid model which you have? If I talk about Bangalore, city, people spend, to be very honest, I'm very practical here. People spend around 1 hour or 1.5 hours to travel. So if organization gives them the option, there's a hybrid model, and we allow you to work from home, that is something I would say the first priority for the candidate looking at, and managing the employee life balance also. So that's very important. What do you have as in well-being perspective along with the salary? What are your policies, processes, how you kind of engage employee from the day one rather than waiting, once employee would be onboarding. So I would say these are the important aspects which we have to really look at.
Yeah, that makes sense. Amitabh, I think you had something to say on this as well.
I would just add to that. So yes, I think points made by the panelists are absolutely valid. I think adding buffers, making a more holistic sort of view in terms of it's not just the number on the offer letter that matters, but you're joining an organization, you're getting into a culture, all of that. And we also used to have additional elements of between that 1 to 3 month period in terms of keeping the candidates warm. We used to call it keeping them warm, essentially having a contact or a touch point with them every other week, just to ensure that they are on board, they are still on board. We also used to get into, we would do some kind of target setting in terms of that, look, if I need to hire 100 odd people, I would go through some element of references, personal references through our friends and colleagues within the organization. And those cases I've seen the chances of them overturning or going awry in the last moment is relatively lesser, right? So I think we would sort of target quite a few of those referral candidates, etc. So I think it's a combination of all of that, essentially, in ensuring that the person sees not only specific elements of the salary, but the broader organization in question while joining the company.
Yeah, I think they're all really fair, and I think they're things that we should be aware of. I would probably throw in another warning on that. Like, I think Indian candidates that I've worked with love WhatsApp. I think I've even had a candidate's mum message me about a job for her daughter as well. So there are some different things that do happen. We've been a little bit shy on the questions, but we've had actually a couple come through actually just recently. So we have one, Amelia, who I know is in Singapore. So thanks for this, Amelia. Business leaders are often enthusiastic to transfer processes to GSEs, but they're reluctant to release control of the resource and the day-to-day running of the process. What is the panel's advice on how to tackle this and win trust? I'll start with Kyle on this one, actually.
Okay, yeah. So that's something that we face quite often. I think you have to have a meeting of the minds before you go into this, that India, let's say employees in India, team members in India, they need to be managed locally. First of all, on the hiring decisions, I would say it's the Indian recruiters and the Indian leaders who know a good candidate to hire. That should not be left to someone in another company or another country to make those hiring decisions, because you just don't know the local market like your local leaders do. I think the important thing in ensuring the proper management, the quality management of the process, is that you have very good SLAs and that you adhere to those SLAs, and that you have a you have a framework with the sending country that says, tell us what you need. What is the output that you need? We will deliver it. We will deliver it on time, and we will deliver it correctly. Tell us what you need. We will tell you, or tell us what you need. We will tell you what we need. We will manage that process. And certainly if you have a track record of delivering that process, let's say for other markets, it puts you in a much better position. But this is very much a leadership question. And I think it's incumbent upon the most senior leadership to drive the business model.
Yeah, I think it's a good answer. I think you're right. Is a leadership question. Amitabh, how do you win trust from people that are sat in a different country, different time zone?
Right. So I think let me spend a little bit of time on how we went about sort of gaining that trust, building the numbers, building the capability, and so on. So when you set up a function or a GCC or a GBS, I think we all understand that there's a process that's involved, right? I think it starts with an established, when you're proving the concept, right? You're establishing it, you're anchoring functions, you're piloting and transitioning certain processes which are relatively lesser complex. It models or borders on a shared services sort of a model. From there on, from establishing, you move into scaling operations where you are actually gaining the benefits of cost arbitrage. You're maturing delivery. It's high quality, predictable delivery. You're building processes. Your efficiencies are increasing. You're reducing time to market on certain, deliveries and so on and so forth. You're achieving more efficiency in terms of utilization, in terms of costs, in terms of productivity. Your quality rates are going down. So those are elements of when you're scaling up the function or the center. And then you move on to something which is more of adding value, right? You're adding value through business impact, through thought leadership, through high skill capabilities. You are, in some cases, augmenting revenue as well from your GBS centers, mature GBS centers, not all centers, right? So I think that's where you're adding value. And then you get on to disruptive innovation, where you are a part of the globally networked organization. You're viewed as another business location, right? Global products and service lines are executed or delivered from the centers and so on. Now, in that process, I'm sorry to say there's no small answer there, right? Because it doesn't. The only way through it is to prove your capacity, prove your capabilities, prove your delivery models, and work through it. In some cases, people realize it faster. In some cases, it takes a lot more time. I think to the point that Kyle was making, it's a leadership element, absolutely, because you need to plan certain processes to be done, initially, then slowly shift into more complex elements to be, to sort of migrate and then deliver from GBS centers. And that's how sort of you do it. You build those relationships, you show the ability to deliver in a complex matrix environment, in a global environment, and slowly move through that establishing to scaling to value addition to disruption.
Yeah, I think you raised some really good points there actually as well. And the things that I would add to that from my personal experience of the people that I've engaged with in India, our team, for example, they love to educate themselves, actually, is what I've found in terms of there's a real sort of cultural thirst for learning. And what you will find is your teams won't get it right first time. They need help and guidance, and there needs to be a little bit that they right. And I think this is where clear, concise instructions and helping someone educate through the process is really, really important. So I refer to a phrase actually that on our podcast, actually, clarity is kindness. If you're really clear with somebody about what it is you want done, it will really help them in terms of the result you get back as well. I'm going to move us on quickly because we've got another question that's come through actually. And this is a question around the view on the cultural requirements for leadership hiring in emerging markets of leaders reporting into global HQs. So how to effectively assess potential gaps of culture communication during the selection process. and also how to effectively stress test local leaders' suitability for a global fit in a very competitive talent environment. So, look, Gaurav, I'll come to you on this one. Like, what would your advice be here to Martin, who's asked the question?
Yeah, so I would say, looking at, when you're hiring somebody and looking at those kind of capability, you have to really look at from the experience perspective what person has delivered in last, I would say in this experience, and what is the kind of, the important aspects, what you're looking from the company perspective, whether it has been achieved or not by that candidate. So I would say it's a kind of combination of experience, skill set, and kind of versatility. What you're looking at this candidate to go and do it. I believe I would not have much point to be at. Probably Gaurav, as in recruiting a lot, would have be kind of giving us more insight on that. Gaurav, sorry, putting you on spot on that.
I think it's a good one to put Gaurav on the spot, actually. So don't worry too much there. But yeah, Gaurav Yadav, this is a good question to sort of pose to you, because there is an element here that I think, and again, I think the question's alluding to a little bit here, is candidates potentially end up overpromise sometimes and potentially underdeliver. How do you sort of solve that problem?
I'll give you a recent example. So for one of the roles that we were recruiting for, we had many good potential candidates, and what our client did was, even though we went through all the rounds of interviews, their decision, the hiring decision, was absolutely based on the psychometric assessment. And wherever they had questions, they'll just move on to the next candidate. So sometimes, during those one-to-one interactions, during the interview process, there are many, this thing comes up, over-promising and under-delivering. So that's why, the data never lies. These psychometric assessments are, kind of helpful. And, and especially for that client of mine, they run the psychometric assessment from bottom to the top roles. For every position, they will make the hiring decision based on those assessments. So it definitely helped them out. And again, this is something that, most of the clients, they like to have multiple rounds of interviews. Sometimes, they have, very lengthy interview process, which is annoying, but, at least at the end of the day, they make a consensual decision. There's a consensus, before they make a hiring decision. So it is kind of helpful for them as well.
Yeah, I'd add to that as well, Gaurav. The thing that I would add here is when you're going through a process, I would definitely ask the same question on a number of different interviews, would be my advice. For me, the consistency of the answer is really key in terms of whether someone is genuinely telling you something or it's something they've just thought up and they haven't actually done. So I think that's a really important part. When I'm thinking about the culture of the person in the organization, honestly, I don't think too much changes from what you do in other locations. I would keep that as consistent as possible and ask them the same questions. It's about the purpose of the individual, what drives and motivates that person. And they're also the sort of things that I would look for in India as I would in the UK, Europe, or Asia. So that hopefully gets to the bottom of that as well. I have another question actually that's talking a little bit about the benefit of a GSE is standardization. And the question is, does that mean the centre can only be set up after this is done, or can we start by recruiting staff? Kyle, I think you mentioned this at the beginning when you were talking about the benefit of it.
Yeah, so certainly when you have a center and you have a process and that process is working very, very well, you can bring additional markets into that process without having to recreate their process, whether they call lift and shift, and say, well, no, we have a working process. This is how it works. Let's take something really easy. Let's say payables. You receive an invoice. This is the process. Well, that's not the way we do it. Well, this is the global standard. This is what we're going to go to. That's very, very straightforward. If it's something that we've never done before, so we're getting into, we're going to be migrating a process that the center has never done before. then we will send, process engineers into the market. They'll look at the process, they'll map out what you're doing, they'll look at, what can be made more efficient. We might implement those process improvements before we migrate. We might, depending on the situation, we might implement the process improvements at the time of migration. Then I would say if it is a new process, we start out small. We start out with maybe a small team of 7, 8 people. We get that bedded down, and then we ramp it up once we're sure that process is really bedded down and efficient, and we're delivering quality output.
Yeah, so it sounds like you want the process set up first. It does sound like you need that standardization of the process first, and then you can sort of take that alongside. Or if you don't, you need the help to actually understand what it is you want to sort of standardize in the first place.
Yeah, whatever we do in the center needs to be standard, right? We can maybe improve it later, but it needs to be standard. We can't have 10 people doing 10 different having 10 different ways to get the output. That won't work. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. And look, I'm looking at the clock, and I know that a lot of people again are sort of going to have to sort of dive off. So that's no problem. There was one last question I did have actually around the locations in India at the moment. Are there any new locations that are popping up in India around for GSCs or GCCs at all? And again, Gaurav and Amitabh, that might be best asking you that at the moment.
Yes, so I was looking at, the locations which we have, again, depend upon, what company really wants to go and do it. We have location, which is, most of the time is Hyderabad, Bangalore, and then we have Mumbai. So depend upon the, the organization and where the talent availability, I would say, for an example, if you really want to set up something which is to do with the kind of banking, I would say the location is pretty much kind of Mumbai, and then you can focus on Hyderabad, and it's all depend upon what is the kind of the business you want to really set up. But having said that, I would say Chennai or Mangalore is a kind of the location which is kind of gearing up. I know that there are certain GBS system already exists there from banking perspective. But I would say Pune is another focus area which is coming up. So these are the two locations I would say from the cost perspective and from the talent here.
So I will just add to that. I think fundamental point made, I totally agree with that. It's dependent on the kind of talent you want. So if it's financials, etc., financial services, Mumbai seems to be the place. Hyderabad, Bangalore, pretty much you get people of all sort of mixes, and then you move into certain IT or tech places like Pune, which is more tech focused. And then there are a couple of small places that smaller tier cities. There is places like Vizag or Visakhapatnam. There is Bhubaneswar, which is the capital of Orissa, which is on the East Coast. So I think some of those centers are also coming up. I am aware of certain companies, fairly new startups, they are building into those sort of getting into those tier 2, tier 3 cities, and all of them have different sort of advantages, right? And I think as you go in, they start typically with your HR, with your IT, with your ops, etc. And by and large, it's sort of synonymous in terms of these few places. So I think those are the new places, I would say.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear about new places, because I think it's fascinating how companies are always looking for that edge now. They're looking for where's going to be the next place to sort of go, or where's going to be the sort of the new hub.
Just Stuart would like to add it. I've seen a kind of a couple of in the industry I'm moving towards the Chandigarh side also. That's a kind of another area I would say. I looked at a couple of organizations setting up out there, because it's again a kind of upcoming location which is pretty near to, I would say, the city, like Delhi. It's could be another choice. Yeah. A lot of infrastructure is being built from the government perspective also. Yeah.
Jaipur as well.
Yeah, and it's great to see that investment as well from the government as well. That's a really big plus.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really conscious of the time. We sort of run over a little bit, but I want to say thank you to everybody that's attended. I want to say especially big thank you to our panel, Kyle, Gaurav, and Amitabh. Thank you so much for being here. I'll leave you all with one little anecdote. I know that a lot of people have talked about these locations. I heard this from a client recently. Talked about these locations as low-cost locations, and actually they don't use that phrase anymore. They don't like that phrase. They call them high-value locations, and that seems to be the new phrase that I think everyone likes to use. But look, it's been really nice to sort of talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye bye.